Hello and welcome. My name is Rasan and I'm making this video to be a short tutorial on how to make lab report quality plots and tables with Microsoft Office. To start, I've just re-downloaded the data from my lab 2, and basically for this video I'm just going to remake this plot. Alright, let's get started. To start off, we'll be copying and pasting the data from this file into this Excel, which I've already done. While data is selected, go on over to insert, and you want to make sure that you use a straight line scatter instead of smooth. You want to do this so that you can see the turbulence in the data. Now that we have this, we're going to delete off the chart title and the grid lines. One of the things that make these plots so nice looking is because you have a secondary axis around the entire graph. The way you get the secondary axis is by selecting one of the data lines and switching it to secondary axis. That gives you one secondary axis. Now in order to get the other one, you're going to go to add chart element and then add the second horizontal axis. The only thing about this is that you don't want axis label on the secondary axis, so don't delete the axis, delete the labels by going into the options and deleting the labels the correct way, and do this for both secondary axes. Now we have to make the axes look nice. To make them look nice, we're going to have to add in some tick marks. You want the tick marks to go inside instead of outside, and you want them to be thick black lines. I changed my axes to 1.5 thickness. And you're just going to do this for all 4 axes. I'm just going to fast forward this because you don't really need to see me do it again. Alright, now that you have that done, the next step is to choose your axis scale. The point of the scale is that you want to encompass all the axis data, but you don't want to have too much empty space. And you also want to not have too many tick marks. The good point is that you don't want any numbers hanging off the very edge, especially when it's not connected to any data. And you should really make sure all your tick marks line up from primary axes to secondary axes. I'm just going to fast forward this again because you've seen me do it. Alright, it's coming along nicely. Next, we're going to be changing the thickness of the actual data lines. When there's a lot of points, it's best to change it to 0. So that you can see the turbulence in the data. But if there's not as many points, you could probably get away with about 1 point or 1.5. Definitely something thicker, it's up to you. I removed them earlier, but you definitely want the axis labels on the primary axes. Many variables in this class will probably have a subscript attached to them, and this is the process of how you get to a subscript. You're going to start off by right-clicking, going to font, and then subscript. Alright, this plot is coming along very nicely. Next, you want to make it into a square. Now, Excel doesn't really have a way to make it into a perfect square, so you kind of just have to eyeball it. And you just play with it until it looks nice and you can see all the features that you need to see on the graph. Next, you're going to be adding back on the legend. I took it off earlier because I wanted to do it this way. It looks really nice if you can put it over the graph, and the way you do this is by clicking on the graph and then going to text box. And with the text box, type in what it should be labeled and simply move this legend over the graph. Now for some final touches, making sure all the fonts are the same. Arrow looks really nice for graphs, and for the legend you're going to have to specifically click on the text boxes and change it within the text box. Another point to make is that the font of your graph does not have to match the font of your lab reports, and so you can change this to Arial and still have Times New Roman in your lab report. This is the last bit for Excel, but you want to make sure that your entire graph does not have an outline over it. Now I took it off, but I'm going to add it back so that you can see what it looks like with and without it. So this is with the outline, and this is without. This is how you want it to be. Alright, now fear not. I forgot to do this the first time I did this, and so I used a random graph. So this is you pasting it into Microsoft Word. You want to paste it as a picture instead of anything else, so that when you scale it up and down, it doesn't change or lose quality. That's all for graphs. I'm going to show you now how to make lab report tables. What you want to do with this table is get rid of all the vertical lines. Now don't delete the lines like I did the first time. Instead, you want to use the painting tool to paint all vertical lines white. I couldn't figure out how to do this any faster than 1 by 1. So, don't do this unless you really have to. The best way that I found to do it is to simply take it from the template, or make it once and add the rows and columns on as you feel necessary for every lab thereafter. To label our table, I'm going to point out now that doing a subscript in Microsoft Word is much easier than in Excel, because all you have to do is press Control+ if you're on PC or Command+ if you're on Mac, and then in order to get out of it, you just press it again. I didn't show this earlier, but this is how you should treat all of your figures and tables within a lab report. You want to create a text box, label it, and then move the table into the text box after you've labeled it. And this just makes sure that your labels stay with all your figures even when you move them around. And so I'm just going to label this table 1 and just give it a title that is related to the data that it holds. As I said earlier, we're just going to cut and paste the table or figure into the text box to make sure that it fits nicely and it stays within. And another thing is that the label for tables go above the table and the label for figures go below the figure. Lastly, remove the outline from around the text box and you should be good to go. I just want to thank Professor Sunderland and Ms. Hamill for teaching me how to make these plots. Alright, let's get all of these points for formatting. And that is all I have for you today. I hope this video helps you make amazing plots for your lab reports.